Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 5 for today. It's Friday, December 7th, 2012, and I'm Darko. Alright, so we left off with this article here. The minister who thinks that lessons in porn are acceptable. The MP says schools are free to teach children despite impacts of images on youngsters. It says here, Liz Truss reveals teachers can give lessons on porn as part of a personal, social, health, and economic class. It says that while the focus on the impact and dangers of graphic images online could be learned, they say that it could backfire by alerting children to what can be easily accessed on the internet. Then we have remember, parents of teen strip search at school sue assistant principal. So apparently the 15-year-old was allegedly strip searched at a high school last month, has filed a lawsuit against the Chicago Public Schools system. The boy and his outraged parents described what happened as he came home and was crying. It goes on also, and it says that the mother contacted the CBS. It says, so this doesn't happen to anyone else. No one else should have to go through what our son went through. Like I said, that's what happens when you put your kids in those schools. Long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery. So pretty interesting. This is actually from February 2011. It says here the treatment for transsexualism is sex reassignment, including hormonal treatment and surgery aimed at making the person's body as congruent with the opposite sex as possible. It says here there is a dearth of long-term follow-up studies after sex reassignment. It says to estimate mortality, morbidity, and criminal rate after surgical sex reassignment. It goes on, and it also says that the main results that they found were that the overall mortality for sex reassigned persons was higher during follow-up than for controls of the same sex, birth sex, particularly death from suicide. Sex reassigned persons also had an increased risk for suicide attempts, psychiatric inpatient care. Comparisons with controls matched on reassigned sex yield similar results. Females to males, but not males to females, had a higher risk for criminal convictions than their respective birth sex controls. Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after the sex reassignment for this patient group. Then you have this article, worrying teenage trend for self-harming sparks sharp increase in calls to ChildLine, child hospital admissions caused by intentional harm with sharp object, up 132% in a decade. So, like I've just covered this recently about how this is part of the Edward Bernays a psychological attack on the population, turning them to consumer slaves, telling them that it's no longer what you need to get by and be happy with what you have, but you have to have wants, right? I have to have this. I'm going to feel better with this. I'm going to feel like a complete piece of crap. I'm going to feel like a defective object unless I have these things, this smartphone, these clothes, this makeup. So it goes on and says, charity blames growing family problems for spike in self-harming among the young. It blamed the wave of self-harm among youngsters on their growing family problems and said that difficulties in the home had now overtaken sexual abuse as the most common troubles faced by the young. It seems that the pressures facing children and young people, particularly girls, like I said, because they're the ones that are a big target by the fashion industry and that, are increasing at such a rate that some of them see drastic measures as the only answer to their problems. It says the main reason young people contacted charity was family relationships. Like I said, it's the war on the family. They're killing it. They're killing our society. I don't know any other way to put it. It says gay marriage given the green light for weddings in churches. Gay couples would be allowed to marry in churches under plans due to be unveiled by the government next week. This is from December 7th, 2012. This is at the same time that the U.S. is now hearing, again, the call for reenacting or reducing or blocking the Defense of Marriage Act. Again, like I said, I don't really care what people do. It's just crazy how this, when you have a tax system and it becomes this social thing, you know what I'm saying? And if you're morally against this or you're ethically against this, there's people that are religious that are, then why should they be paid? Why should they have to be forced to pay for abortions? Why should they have to be forced to pay for contraceptives in high schools? Teaching sex ed to children, why should they have to teach or fund a marriage that something they don't see as a marriage? You know, as part of a tribal system, you know, that's why I don't like this phony, fake thing that they call democracy. You know, it just call a spade a spade. I've talked about that before, you know, at least with slaves back in the day, they knew that they were slaves. They weren't told that they weren't. Whereas now you're told that you're free and you're a slave. So we live in a scientific dictatorship. So if you live in a dictatorship, just call it a dictatorship. You know? It'd be one thing if people voluntarily said, okay, let's have a dictatorship. But it'd be another thing if people thought that they were voting and they were free and they had this, you know, they had their own decision-making powers, and they went to vote every year or every 4 years, and they weren't free. And the politicians just laugh at them because they actually think that they're free. And they live in a scientific dictatorship. They're being experimented on. They're lab rats. Denmark forces churches to perform same-sex marriages. It's from June 7, 2012. The nation of Denmark voted to force churches and the established Evangelical Lutheran Church to perform same-sex marriage ceremonies inside their sanctuaries, although 1/3 of all denomination priests say they will not participate in such rituals. Ontario Christian minister forced to conduct same-sex marriages or get sacked. Yeah, this is from September 11, 2012, but I think it was actually a little bit older. A Church of Christ minister who has been responsible for civic marriage ceremonies. City Hall in Cambridge for the past 15 years is facing the axe if he doesn't agree to same-sex marriages, followed by what? A 4,250% increase in fetal deaths reported after flu shot given to pregnant women. So yeah, I almost thought that was a typo. Yeah, 4,000% increase. The interesting part is that the CDC, which is basically an arm of this eugenics infrastructure, is kind of like family planning services. They call it reproductive health services. It's a nice way to twist it, what they're actually doing. But yeah, the CDC and all them and the doctors and scientists, they always recommend you got to get herd immunity, and you got to target the main groups, which are old people, children, and the pregnant women. I mean, it should be enough of a hint there. Like I said, most people don't have common sense now, and it's not that they're lacking of intelligence. It's just that they're naive. A Tasered LaPorte County jail inmate miscarries. I think this is not the first time. This happened a couple months ago. LaPorte County jail inmate was tasered after a fight with a jail deputy and then miscarried. The female inmate became involved in a physical altercation with another inmate when a jail deputy intervened. The responding deputy was taken to the floor by one of the inmates when the other responding deputies arrived. Deploying the taser de-escalated the incident, causing the inmate to release the jail deputy, so it was justified. During the exam, it was determined that her fetus was deceased. And I'm not for, you know, like I was talking about schools, I'm not for prisons either. I mean, that's not a sign of justice being done or being carried out. When you see, like, these two individuals should have been able to fight. I mean, yeah, it's not smart for her if she's pregnant, but who knows? Maybe she didn't have a choice. A lot of times when you're in altercations, you don't really have a choice. You can try to back away and stuff like that, but sometimes you just can't. You got to stand your ground. And, of course, she couldn't do that. So then what happens? She gets tasered and loses her kid, right? So that's the whole thing. It's not about justice. It's about intervening in people's personal affairs. But there's something just demonic to me about women's prisons. It just doesn't seem right that women are in prisons. I mean, let alone men. I mean, I saw the video by one individual on YouTube that used to live in Switzerland, you know, showing the female prisons that they have here and just talking about the horrible things that they do to those women, raping them and stuff like that. Childless parents at higher risk of early death, says a new study by Danish researchers have found that parents who are unsuccessful in having children are at a higher risk of premature death. Indian village bans cell phones for women. It says here, a village in North India has outlawed the use of cell phones in public by women because the male council elders say they're leading to elopements. I think that's a weird word to use from Reuters. It always gives us a lot of embarrassment when someone asks who has eloped this time, explains the head of a committee tasked with enforcing the ban. It says single women will be fined $180 and married women about $40. It says even married women were deserting their husbands to elope with lovers, says the enforcer, so we decided to tackle it firmly. Mobile phones are debasing the social atmosphere, which is, there is some truth to that. I can't stand that when I'm around people and they don't even acknowledge your presence. They're just completely fixated on those damn phones. says here, as the National explains, such laws are not unusual in northern India. Says these are tools of a patriarch, says an advocate for women's rights. They feel that women will connect with whoever they want and fear that they will get boyfriends and break the caste system. So it says here, and all that rubbish. These are unacceptable, archaic ideas. So the way I like to look at it, guys, is like, yeah, it's not cool when you get forced married and stuff like that. But who knows? You look at the olden days, probably people that got married young or people that were in those arranged marriages ended up being married for a long time. But I look at what's going on now after we've seen all the engineering of society. Well, what do we see? I see a society that's broken and fractured. It's not sustainable. You look at the shows like The Bachelor, where these guys, these rich guys or whatever, all these girls that are all, like I said, they all have their own insecure issues because of the media and everything telling them that they're pieces of crap. But then they all have to pie for this guy's attention. They're all making out in hot tubs and stuff like that. And that's like in the video I've seen recently, that's supposed to be a very personal, private, intimate moment, and they're just putting it out there, and saying, oh, see. But the thing that I see is it's about value, right? It's about how people see each other as far as getting married. They see, especially with women to men, see them as some kind of financial, they look at them and scan them down to see what their value is, their monetary value, and that's how they base it, not off morals or ethics or anything like that. It's kind of the opposite, where men kind of look at women as objects, and not so much as a monetary object or monetary value, but aesthetic value, how it makes them feel about themselves by being with a hot girl, right? It pains me, says Clinton. Here she is again in the headlines, decries plight of women in male-dominated countries. In an emotional speech as she nears the end of her term in office, Clinton warned that there would be sacrifices and losses before daughters were valued as sons across the world, according to reporters traveling to the Secretary of State. Yeah, see, I think she's referring to the Chinese state, and, well, it's just pretty unfortunate because her and her cronies at the Council on Foreign Relations and these little private think tanks and the government itself that taxes or pays for those types of systems to promote the one-child policy, where they euthanize and force abortion women and girls. Of course, they're having their own blowback, their own social engineering blowback, when there's young men that go into preschools and just start knifing and butchering up children. Right? There's something very sick, something that's going on there, and that's what I think is due to the engineering. So she was given a humanitarian award by the non-governmental organization NGO Concern Worldwide, whose chief executive is Tom Arnold. Hailed her as one of the greatest secretaries of state in the history of the Republic. Sorry, that was a little Alex Jones-ish, but the empire, right? And they like to use stories like the Pakistani schoolgirl's story as propaganda because they totally disregard, like in Saudi Arabia, one of their other humanitarian states that's a dictatorship that's enforcing quote, democracy on countries that are actually more democratic than them, like Syria. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the Sunnis and the Zionists and the Qataris and that. They have a male-dominated society. They're putting GPS tracker chips, RFID chips, on women, on females in Saudi Arabia. But she ain't talking about that. She's talking about Pakistan, right? Because they're drone bombing them. See, that's a humanitarian thing too, isn't it? They're biatch, drone bombing families and farmers. That's a very humanitarian thing to do. Now, I think in those countries, women know what they are, who they are, and they're very respected out there, and not any more than men. Yes, men make the, quote, decisions and stuff like that. But they're not like you, out there acting like you have testicles and wearing the pants of the family. Now, I think things could change and get better. Of course I do. But I think it needs to be done voluntarily, not force people, criticize, and especially when, like I said, her of all people. The disappearing male is about one of the most important and least publicized issues of the facing the human species, toxic threat to the male reproductive system. As just recently, France's study found that fertility rates are plummeting thanks to the eugenics. Let's hear 3 cheers for eugenicists. For the last few decades, there's seen incidences of boys and young men suffering from genital deformities, low sperm. At the same time, boys are now at far more risk for ADHD, autism. a documentary takes a look at how researchers are responsible for many of these problems. It's talking about the chemicals that are everywhere, like BPA. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you very much.